Throughout history, men have emerged whose life stories could fill volumes. Artists who dominate countless aspects of their profession. Soldier poets. Scientists with minds like wells of wisdom. Some have lived in the light of fame. Others have been forgotten by posterity. This is the story of one of these men. Scientist, mariner, and spy. Jorge Juan y Santacilia, also known as the Spanish Sage. (1713). The Treaties of Utrecht put an end to the War of Spanish Succession. King Felipe V approved the access of women to the Spanish throne. The Royal Academy of Language was founded.
On January the 9th, 1713, I, Mosen Ginés Pujalte, licensed by the rector and according to the rite of our Holy Mother Church, baptized Jorge Gaspar, son of Don Bernardo Juan y Canicia, and Doña Violante Santacilia y Soler.
So read the certificate of baptism of our protagonist in the old parish church of Monforte del Cid. Four days before, on the eve of Twelfth Night, Jorge Juan y Santacilia came into the world at the paternal farm of Fontanet in the district of Novelda, Alicante. They say that a newborn baby brings a loaf of bread under its arm. As though he foresaw these difficult times, Jorge Juan came holding the hand of fortune. While Fontanet stood on dry land, the family of Jorge Juan had their ancestral home in the port city of Alicante. A place more suited to a child whose fate was to be linked to the sea. His father had served as a captain of artillery against the squadrons from Holland and England. During the War of Succession, he distinguished himself in the defense of the city in support of the cause of Felipe V. The family belonged to the local gentry. They were known in Alicante as the Juan de Vergara. They lived close to the town hall. And, according to them, they descended from the knights who accompanied King Jaime I of Aragon when the Moors conquered Valencia. To all of this should be added the politics of very profitable marriages. Jorge Juan was the result of the second marriage of his father to a widow from a noble family. The bride was a native of the town of Elche and had brought with her a 6,000 ducat dowry, a small fortune. Both spouses already had children at the time of their marriage. So Jorge Juan came to know 8 brothers, of whom only 2 shared with him both parents. The youngest of them all had the misfortune of never getting to know his father. Jorge Juan was not yet 3 years old when his father died. His mother was pregnant at the time. The dispute that followed the reading of the will caused the family to fragment. The mother eventually distanced herself from the Juan de Vergara and returned to her native Elche. Jorge Juan studied his first subjects at the ancient Jesuit College of Alicante. He was supervised by his uncle, Antonio, canon of the collegiate church of the city. Through the bequest of his father, and until his coming of age, Jorge Juan's guardian was to be his paternal uncle, Cipriano. Cipriano had made a career in the military order of Malta. He occupied prominent positions as the commander of Mirambel and later as the bailiff of Caspe and the receiver of the castle district of Amposta. He administered, therefore, an extensive territory, and in exchange he received a considerable income. Had he been the firstborn, the fate of Jorge Juan would have been different. In Spain, primogeniture applied. The eldest son inherited the land and buildings. The rest of the children, the so-called second sons, were forced into serving in the military or to take religious vows. But Jorge Juan, who was the third-born son, had to choose an occupation, and for that reason Cipriano took over the education of his nephew. He decided to devote himself to him, to sponsor him with his influence, and treat him as if he was his own child. We are in Valletta, the capital of Malta. For centuries it was one of the most powerful strongholds in the Mediterranean. The military order of St. John of Jerusalem had emerged during the Crusades. It offered protection and humanitarian aid to Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. After the defeat of the Crusaders, the order had retreated from island to island fighting Islam. In exchange for a symbolic tribute of a falcon, Emperor Carlos I of Spain had ceded the island of Malta, and the Knights of St. John had taken the name of their new homeland. If in the past the Knights of Malta had defended Christianity with their spears, now they did it with the artillery of their ships. They were enemies who were greatly feared by the Turkish and the Barbary pirates. At the age of just 12, Jorge Juan came to Malta. To prepare for his future in the order, his uncle, Cipriano, had previously made him study Latin grammar in Zaragoza. And he had received his appointment as personal page to the Grand Master, the highest authority of the Order of Malta.
Grand Master, I beg to be admitted into the militia and the company of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem.
Do you have the strong intention of defending the Church of God and our Catholic faith at all times, even though your life may be in danger?
I promise to defend it in any way I can, and on every occasion and time.
Your demand is a very important one. and usually granted only to those who, by their former bloodline and bravery, become worthy. But having been informed of your nobility, virtue, and the honest qualities of your person, perchance we shall consider your supplication.
Los requisitos en el siglo XVIII para el ingreso en la Orden de San Juan o en la Orden de Malta no habían variado radicalmente de los que se venían exigiendo en los siglos anteriores, incluso en el siglo XII. Tal vez un poco adaptados a los nuevos tiempos, pero básicamente los mismos. De manera que la Orden de Malta lo que busca es un joven que se pueda formar. Es rarísimo el caso de vocaciones tardías, también las hay. Un joven que ya sepa de la Orden de Malta por tradición familiar, que no tenga defecto físico, sobre todo porque va a tener que ser un combatiente, va a tener que ser un soldado, que tenga fortaleza física y salud, que tenga esa vocación acendrada y que sea un buen cristiano, sin mezcla de sangre no cristiana, no por un motivo racista, sino por un motivo, digamos, de prevención contra una posible infiltración, digamos, del enemigo en las filas de la Orden de Malta. Ese joven, inteligente, listo, despierto, aunque muy joven, buena madera o buena cera para hacer de él un caballero de Malta.
It was the year 1732, and Jorge Juan found himself back in Alicante. This port was the rallying point of the army that seized the city of Oran from the control of the Turks. Jorge Juan was now 19 years old. He'd been appointed Knight Commander of Aliaga by the Order of Malta, and he served as a sub-brigadier of midshipmen on the 60-gun Spanish warship Castilla. As a member of the Order of Malta, Jorge Juan had had to run caravans. That is to say, participate in campaigns against the Barbary privateers. Serving in the Spanish Royal Navy within the chain of command meant first having become a member of the Academy of Midshipmen. The Royal Company of Midshipmen was in Cadiz. None other than the Tsar had sent his nobles there to train as mariners. When Jorge Juan entered its classrooms, he had already trained with the Navy of the Order of Malta. And he had a strong nautical and mathematical background. Not surprisingly, in Cadiz his classmates gave him the nickname of Euclides, the father of geometry. The era of Jorge Juan is known as the Age of Enlightenment. This age can be defined as a movement that sought to drive away the darkness of ignorance and religious superstition through the light of knowledge and reason. European kings could be convinced to wear the crown by the grace of God, but they recognized the advantages of a movement that put its faith in material progress and applied sciences. In Spain, the universities were controlled by the Catholic Church, which preached from them their concept of the world, oblivious to new ideas. Practical scientific knowledge, typical of the Enlightenment, was offered by institutions of the Crown. Academies that were linked to the armed forces, such as the midshipmen.
We need to open our eyes to see what modern writers have discovered through their experiments, both in the macro and the microcosm. And we know there is another new world. Why, for a purpose so holy, useful and profitable as to advance knowledge of natural things, should not all the lords of the nobility lend a hand? Why then do we not go forward and promote this kind of study? In order to do this, why don't we establish in the court of the King of Spain a royal academy, as there is in that of the King of France, in that of England, and in that of the great emperor?
Like it or not, the truth is that Spain fell behind other enlightened nations. Jorge Juan was to become one of the figures that would put Spain on the road to modern science. His dual talents of mariner and scientist would mark his footsteps.
Jorge Juan fue un hombre ilustrado, en el sentido más completo de la palabra ilustración. No solo era un marino de guerra, que era un marino de guerra, era también un marino matemático, reflexivo, estudiaba hasta la botánica o las minas, los minerales, ¿no? Es un buen ejemplo de lo que en España cundió desde la época incluso muy anterior de los grandes navegantes, la idea de que el marinero no es solo alguien que está en el mar para llegar de un sitio a otro, sino para comprender las leyes que rigen ese movimiento. Eso no se ha perdido. Todavía hoy los planetarios más usados son los de las escuelas de marina, curiosamente. Ahora tenemos planetarios recreativos en museos y en otros sitios, pero sigue siendo una herramienta estupenda para formar nuevos marinos, ya desde la época de Jorge Juan, hace más de 2 siglos y pico.
1735. The Infante Don Carlos of Spain reigned over Naples and Sicily. The meteorologist George Hadley found a connection between the winds and the rotation of the Earth. Johann Sebastian Bach composed his Ascension Oratorio. On the 7th of July, 1735, Jorge Juan landed in Cartagena de Indias in Colombia. His uncle, Cipriano, had financed his voyage. This would be the last time that he would be able to help his nephew before he died. The motive which led Jorge Juan to the new continent was to carry out a mission for the crown. He was to work on the solution of an ancient scientific controversy. And it had an international character. In the 18th century, it was known that the Earth was round. But its precise shape was not known. In England, the scientist Isaac Newton had postulated the law of universal gravitation. And he concluded that the Earth was an oblate spheroid, like a watermelon. In contrast, the Frenchman Jacques Cassini, director of the Observatory of Paris, argued that the planet was stretched by the poles, like a melon. Geodesy is the science that studies the shape of the Earth, and on maps represents its surface. Maps that have to encircle our planet like a made-to-measure suit. But to ensure accurate data, it was first necessary to ascertain the exact shape of the Earth. Geodesic precision ensures that the cartography is reliable. GPS satellite systems use maps that must conform exactly to the precise proportions of the planet.
La geodesia es el arte de medir en el terreno a partir de los ángulos. Tú mides, por ejemplo, una casa muy alta, pones desde aquí una mira y mides con respecto a la horizontal el ángulo que tiene esa casa. Sabiendo la distancia, por trigonometría sabes cuál es la altura. Sabiendo la altura, por trigonometría decides cuál es la distancia. Y esto se utiliza muy fácilmente en grandes extensiones cuando tienes un punto fijo sobre el cual observar otras direcciones, otros ángulos y poder medir distancias con una precisión grande. A ojo, no es difícil. Con un sextante se mide la altura de los astros y tal, la posición aproximada de un barco en medio del mar. Pero claro, cuando necesitas medir con mucha precisión para saber exactamente qué longitud tiene un grado de meridiano, ahí ya necesitas aparatos muy sensibles. Y por tanto, la geodesia fue una ciencia que desde la época de los agrimensores griegos no ha parado de mejorarse.
A meridian is an imaginary line that connects the North and South poles and corresponds to the curved shape of the planet's surface. Unlike us, the man of the 18th century could not see the Earth from above. The only way to confirm its actual appearance was to find out how the Earth's circumference varied. To compare how the meridian curved near the poles and on the equator. To determine the shape of the Earth, the Royal Academy of Sciences in Paris decided to send 2 geodesic expeditions. One would measure the meridian arc up to the Arctic Circle in Lapland. The other expedition would do the same, but near Quito in Ecuador, a region which at that time belonged to Spain and was closed to foreign visitors. The fact that France had to request permission from the Spanish crown to send a scientific expedition to its American territories had several angles. The Council of the Indies, the highest Spanish political and administrative organ of the Philippines and America, showed misgivings about the voyage planned by a foreign power. On the other hand, scientific achievements conferred a prestige which helped to exalt the image of a monarchy. King Felipe V of Spain gave his permission for the expedition to take place in his domain. But in return, France would share the glory. 2 Spanish representatives would participate in the expedition. On the French side, the expedition was to be led by the astronomer Louis Gaudin, who had given his name to one of the craters of the Moon. With him would work illustrious scientists like the hydrographer Pierre Bouguer, the botanist Joseph de Jussieu, and the geographer Charles-Marie de la Condamine. A large group of scientists and technicians, specialists in other disciplines, would travel with them. On behalf of Spain, 2 Royal Navy sailors were to participate in the expedition. Among the possible candidates, Jorge Juan y Santacilia was one of those chosen. The other would be the Sevillano, Antonio de Ulloa. Both would maintain a lifelong friendship.
We have found 2 travel companions, appointed by the court of Spain to assist us as surveyors and astronomers. They were chosen so quickly that they suddenly went from the rank of midshipmen to lieutenants of the ship. This is how you start counting people in Spain who only bring to Peru love of terrible physics.
Actually, Jorge Juan and Antonio de Ulloa had received appropriate scientific training. They were brilliant and had orders to carry out the objectives of the expedition. Even if the eminent French scientists were to withdraw early. The Spanish and the French met in Cartagena de Indias. From there, they set out for the Andes mountain range. The Creole scientist Pedro Vicente Maldonado joined them on the road. West of Quito, now the capital of Ecuador, begins a very level plain. This was to be the place where the expedition would measure the curvature of the Earth. An immense expanse, surrounded by high mountains, which they had to triangulate with rudimentary tools. To cope with the work, the expedition was divided into two teams. Both would measure the same trajectory, but moving in opposite directions. They would then collate the results. Jorge Juan joined as a mathematician in Godin's team. He came to occupy an important position on an expedition where the work on calculations was essential. Scientists from the expedition also conducted their own investigations. Condamines' team identified quinine and rubber, a material which was used in pre-Hispanic villages for their ball games. Jussieu, the botanist, introduced the heliotrope to Europe from Peru, an ornamental plant that is also used against malaria and gangrenous ulcers. Antonio de Ulloa found platinum. He dubbed it Pinto platinum, after the name of the Colombian river where he found it. As naval officers, Jorge Juan and Antonio de Ulloa worked on improving the defenses of Lima, the capital of Peru, and Guayaquil in Ecuador. They also patrolled the coasts of the South Sea, commanding 2 armed merchant ships. The 2 Spaniards were carrying out these duties when the French put an end to their expedition. La Condamine, Bourget, and the other team members returned to Europe. Following their original orders, Jorge Juan and Ulloa continued measuring the meridian to finish their part of the job. The data to ascertain the true shape of the Earth was complete.
El trabajo desarrollado por Jorge Juan y su compañero Antonio de Ulloa en las tareas de medición del grado del meridiano para determinar la forma exacta de la Tierra, yo creo que debemos de considerarlo enormemente acertado, dadas las circunstancias en las que debieron de llevar a cabo sus trabajos de observación, también los medios científicos y técnicos con los que en la época se contaba, y porque en esencia también tanto Ulloa como Juan trasladaron de inmediato los resultados de estas observaciones al papel. Quiere ello decir que se conoció de manera inmediata, en 1748, se conocieron los resultados científicos de la expedición. Los franceses tardarían muchísimos años en hacer lo mismo. En consecuencia, desde mi punto de vista, el trabajo desarrollado por Jorge Juan, los resultados de esa expedición geodésica a los reinos del Perú, fue perfecto, fue excelente, insisto, dadas las circunstancias, las condiciones de trabajo y los medios de que disponía.
When Jorge Juan and Ulloa first set foot on America, they had more than one mission. They were Navy sailors. They were trained to distinguish whether their French companions were acting as mere scientists or as spies. The Spanish defenses of the New World were a closely guarded secret. And the geodesic expedition was to travel throughout the continent. Apart from monitoring the French scientists, Jorge Juan and Antonio de Ulloa would work as intelligence agents. The reports coming from America that reached the Spanish crown were insufficient and often biased by special interests. Jorge Juan and Antonio de Ulloa would take note of the deficiencies and problems that they found in Spanish America. Their criticisms were vehement.
The tyranny that the native Indians are suffering is born of an insatiable hunger for wealth on the part of those governing them. And since they have no other way to get rich than by oppressing the Indians, they demand more of them than they could from their own slaves.
Neither honor, nor conscience, nor fear, nor the recognition of being maintained by overgrown sovereign wages offer encouragement in those countries to preserve that which is of obligation to all. And so, the king is very generously supporting his worst enemies.
The intelligence reports provided by Antonio de Ulloa and Jorge Juan would be well received by the crown. But they were confidential. Their secret information about America did not see the light of day until the independence of the Spanish colonies, and they were first published in England. Jorge Juan and Antonio de Ulloa sailed back to Europe separately. To prevent their work being lost at sea, each carried a complete copy of the documents. 9 years after their arrival, they left America. (1746). The Battle of Culloden ended the aspirations of the Stuarts to the throne of England. Diderot published his philosophical thoughts. In Fuentetorres in Spain, the painter Francisco de Goya was born. The frigate on which Antonio de Ulloa was returning was captured, and the results of the geodesic expedition to Ecuador fell into British hands. The Duke of Bedford said, "War should not offend the sciences, nor the arts, nor their teachers." The British liberated Ulloa, and he was made a member of the Royal Society. Jorge Juan landed at the French port of Brest and went on to Paris. There, the astronomers and mathematicians of the Royal Academy of Sciences verified the observations which he had made during the geodesic expedition. Condamine himself, who at first had scorned him, proposed him as a member and corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences in Paris. For Jorge Juan and Antonio de Ulloa, the return to Spain was disheartening. Their scientific work aroused no interest. King Felipe V had died. His successor, Ferdinand VI, found himself reorganizing his kingdom. Jorge Juan and Ulloa managed to be received by the Marquis de la Ensenada, the influential super-minister who controlled the secretariats of the Treasury, War, Navy, and the Indies. He also belonged to the Order of Malta, and he would become Jorge Juan's main protector. Under a banal image of a refined courtier, he possessed one of the clearest and most astute minds in the kingdom. Both sailors were commissioned to write the results of the expedition. Ulloa wrote the historical account of the journey to South America. And Jorge Juan gathered his scientific findings in the book Astronomical and Physical Observations made by the Order of His Majesty in the Kingdoms of Peru, from which the shape and magnitude of the Earth is deduced. For their publication, they counted on the patronage of the Marquis de la Ensenada. But inquisitorial censorship crippled the publishing of Jorge Juan's book. The Inquisition still questioned that the Earth revolved around the Sun. To overcome their opposition, Jorge Juan was forced to seek support from other influential personages of the court. Even so, he only managed to publish his book, presenting the motion of the planet as if it were a hypothesis. But he did it in such a way that no scientist thought that he believed it. To the embarrassment of the Inquisition, the astronomical observations laid the foundations of the prestige of Jorge Juan. His fame as a learned man extended internationally and put Spain at the heart of enlightened science. During Jorge Juan's time in America, Spain and England had gone to war. Peace for all, war for none. That was the motto that Ferdinand VI of Spain wanted for his reign. The Treaty of Aquisgrán allowed him to achieve this. For Jorge Juan and the Marquis de la Ensenada, this was only a peace in waiting. In March 1749, Jorge Juan came to London. He was accompanied by 2 midshipmen, with the excuse of improving their mathematical studies. On the banks of the Thames, Deptford and Woolwich can be found, 2 major royal shipyards. The Marquis de la Ensenada had ordered Jorge Juan to spy on British shipbuilding.
Ensenada comisiona a Jorge Juan una instrucción reservada. Esa instrucción reservada tiene del orden de 30 encargos de diversas áreas. Por ejemplo, una de las áreas es que averigüe cómo combaten el contrabando los ingleses. Otra área es decir, qué productos de la España que están solamente reservados al rey están utilizando los ingleses a través de ese contrabando. Otro es cómo organizan los hospitales de inválidos. Otro es cómo se fabrica el lacre. Es decir, que hay cantidad de cosas que quiere que vea y principalmente que se traiga cuanto más libros mejor para poder ilustrar a nuestras clases dirigentes de Marina. Y dice el Ensenada concretamente que España está empobrecida porque no tenemos libros que nos enseñen. Que es una misión en la que tiene que ver qué barcos están haciendo, que averigüe qué constructores hay, que se traiga 2 constructores, pero no para que diseñen barcos, sino para que nos enseñen a construir. Es muy curioso lo que dice, para que enseñen a los marinos españoles el arte de fabricar.
Actually, there were two Jorge Juans in England. The first was the man of science, the same man who, shortly after arriving, was admitted as a member of the Royal Society. The second was the Jorge Juan who hid under various aliases as required. This Jorge Juan received a salary from the Spanish crown which was excessive for any scientist. With that money, he could buy privileged information. Written in code, Jorge Juan sent his reports to the Marquis de la Ensenada through the Spanish embassy. Apart from discussing naval construction, their communications ranged from British plans to attack America to technical issues, such as the new steam machines. Jorge Juan's main source was an Irish Catholic priest, Father Lynch.
One fine day, I noticed a chap following me. As he passed, he tipped his hat in greeting. Finally, I asked him what he wanted. The Irish priest, for that is what he was, made me several offers from the King of Spain, which eventually I accepted. I came to Spain as my own boss, and nowadays I earn 6 times more.
Four prominent shipbuilders and more than 50 high-ranking technicians were recruited by Jorge Juan and moved to Spain with their families. The British Admiralty knew of the existence of a Spanish spy. Someone had given warning that the Royal Navy planned to occupy the Falkland Islands. With so many English technicians involved, there had to be a leak. And Father Lynch was arrested. Put on alert, Jorge Juan fled from England. Disguised as a sailor, he managed to board the merchant vessel, the Santa Ana de Santoña, bound for France.
Jorge Juan es un científico nato, en el sentido de que domina las matemáticas y las ciencias físicas. Conecta enseguida con las sociedades inglesa y francesa y percibe, ve y comprueba por sus contactos cómo la aplicación de la matemática y de la ciencia física, la mecánica concretamente, a las obras de ingeniería, las obras civiles y a los barcos tiene éxito y realmente salen barcos mejores. Los franceses son los primeros que esto lo hacen y los ingleses van detrás. Él en estas dos relaciones ve cómo puede mejorar la calidad de los barcos y el modo de diseñarlos si aplica conceptos que hasta entonces no se han transcrito, no digo que no se utilizaran. La construcción naval española era muy buena, era tan buena que es copiada y perseguida para copiarla por los ingleses, pero se hacían sin planos. Los planos eran personales, no eran mandados por el Estado. Jorge Juan organiza el que esto se haga de una manera estable y general para toda España, con la ventaja que tiene un plano, que es que el mismo plano se puede fabricar en Ferrol, en Cartagena o en Cádiz simultáneamente, mientras que el plano personal lo hacían en cada astillero.
The Marquis de la Ensenada had undertaken the reform of the Spanish fleet. He had stored up strategic materials, such as wood, and economic resources. When Jorge Juan returned from his mission, Ensenada placed him in charge of the construction of ships and naval dockyards. Jorge Juan was going to act as would a CEO, setting goals and planning the effort to achieve them. The Navy constructors who were recruited in England organized the Spanish shipyards with British efficiency. Edward Bryant, who was recruited by Father Lynch, would take care of Cartagena. Jorge Juan designed for his shipyard the most advanced repair docks in the Mediterranean. In Ferrol, where a completely new naval dockyard was constructed, worked Richard Ruth. Matthew Mullen would take care of the shipbuilding facilities of La Carraca in Cádiz. The shipyards were located within the naval dockyards, and the same measure was applied to the stores and to the factories for essential supplies, such as candles and rope for rigging. During his mission in England, Jorge Juan had procured the plans of the ship of the line Culloden. From these, he developed his own ideas. He applied scientific principles to the design of Spanish warships. His innovations would be known as the system of Jorge Juan.
El denominado sistema Jorge Juan, impropiamente conocido como sistema inglés, tiene su base precisamente en la necesidad de modificar el sistema constructivo español vigente hasta la fecha. Este descansaba en los planteamientos de Antonio de Gaztañeta, un vasco que construía los barcos de una manera excesivamente maciza, por tanto eran barcos muy pesados, poco maniobreros y lentos en su desplazamiento. Como consecuencia del viaje de Jorge Juan a Inglaterra para estas tareas de espionaje industrial, él constató que los barcos de Inglaterra eran mucho más ligeros, mucho más maniobrables, rápidos, y en consecuencia pensó que era lo más adecuado para adaptarlos a un nuevo sistema de construcción naval en el país. A su regreso decidió alterar lo que hasta ese momento había sido el sistema tradicional de construcción. En ese sentido, intentó aplicar tanto la práctica como la teoría, utilizando maquetas a escala y reuniendo a todos los constructores que había traído desde Inglaterra durante 9 meses, en el año 1752, en Madrid, elaboró una serie de planos donde dio cabida a todos los tipos de buques que se podían construir, así como a todas las piezas, elaborando un sistema, digamos, de construcción uniforme que pudiera ser aplicado en todos los arsenales sin ningún tipo de dificultad.
Without neglecting his other obligations, Jorge Juan was named captain of the Royal Company of Midshipmen of Cádiz and its academy. If the ships were to be built using scientific methods, the officers would also have to have a scientific education. Jorge Juan would publish the Compendium of Navigation for the use of gentlemen midshipmen. With this, he intended to offer a knowledge base to Spanish sailors, men whose training was often limited to experience. But the masterpiece of Jorge Juan was the Theoretical and Practical Maritime Review, which represents his contribution to naval engineering.
El examen marítimo teórico-práctico, publicado en el año 1771, es el mejor tratado de mecánica de fluidos publicado durante el siglo XVIII. Jorge Juan llevaba trabajando en el mismo desde hacía unos 14 años. En esencia, lo que intentaba era trasladar a la opinión pública, fundamentalmente al mundo científico, de qué manera se comporta un sólido dentro de un fluido, pero en este caso un barco, teniendo en cuenta todas las circunstancias que influyen en la navegación, hidrostática, los vientos, etcétera, etcétera. La obra fue saludada pues, con enorme regocijo dentro del mundo científico, fue considerada la mejor que hasta ese momento se había publicado y en Francia es absolutamente reconocida, es publicada, traducida al francés, recibe el reconocimiento de la Académie des Sciences y el gobierno francés publica la traducción que llevó a cabo Lévesque bajo el patrocinio de la Academia de Ciencias. Es la obra que consagra a Jorge Juan como uno de los más importantes científicos del siglo XVIII.
Jorge Juan's work on naval reform solved the problems of modernization, construction, and training. In less than a decade, Spain had 47 naval vessels out of the 60 that had been set as a goal. For its part, England had more than 100. But if two Bourbon monarchies as large as France and Spain were allied, their fleets together could show their teeth to England. They had to cut the head off the Spanish threat. The Marquis de la Ensenada had tried to reduce the excessive income of the nobility, and also their privileges. The English ambassador took advantage of this to conspire with the Duke of Alba and other discontented nobles. Exploiting the king's desire for peace, the conspirators accused the Marquis de la Ensenada of trying to start a war with England on his own. As a result, Ensenada was removed from all of his positions and banished to Granada in 1754. England had achieved its objective. Once the Marquis de la Ensenada disappeared from the Spanish political scene, the construction of warships was reduced. The criteria that Jorge Juan imposed for the design of new ships was replaced. The new French-inspired construction system proved no better. Years later, Jorge Juan wrote,
"It is true that I am asked for my opinion on many things, but only once they are concluded, and having no chance of producing, nothing further can be done. It reduces everything to the old routine and no more. Proof of this is that they have not yet spoken a word to me about their intention to enlarge the Navy. Therefore, how do you expect us to help promote it?"
Jorge Juan never again had as much influence in Spain as he did before with the Marquis de la Ensenada. Yet, despite the fall from grace of his friend and supporter, Jorge Juan left unscathed. He continued at the forefront of the Royal Company of Midshipmen and of the academy linked to it. Included in its installations was the Astronomical Observatory of Cadiz. Jorge Juan had founded it with Louis Godin as director. Godin was the same French astronomer who led the geodesic expedition to Ecuador. And the observatory was one of the most advanced in Europe. From this period also dates the creation of La Asamblea Amistosa Literaria, the literary-friendly assembly, an alternative for Jorge Juan after failing in his attempt to establish a Spanish Academy of Sciences like those in Europe. Upon the death of Fernando VI, Charles III of Spain succeeded the throne. The new monarch would go down in history as the Enlightened King. and Jorge Juan was known throughout all of Europe as the Spanish sage. Jorge Juan was to become a consultant and jack of all trades for the Spanish crown. More than a dozen requests from the king and his ministers forced him to travel throughout Spain. He even went to Morocco to establish a peace treaty with the Sultan. Upon his return, Jorge Juan took over the Real Seminario de Nobles de Madrid, a prestigious, enlightened school where the aristocracy of blood and money educated their own. Jorge Juan rejuvenated education and gave luster to an institution in decline. But his advanced age and the intense activity were taking their toll.
La salud de Jorge Juan va a empezar a resentirse en el último tercio de su vida. En 1762, estando en Ferrol, va a sufrir una serie de cólicos biliosos convulsivos de nervios, que es como lo denomina su secretario Miguel Sanz. Esto va a determinar que vaya quedando progresivamente incapacitado de las manos y que continuamente tenga que solicitar permiso para ausentarse de sus ocupaciones e ir a reponerse a baños como los de Busot, Sacedón o Trillo. Estos ataques se le van a reproducir de una forma constante cada vez más a menudo. En 1772 es ya director del Seminario de Nobles y continuamente tiene que abandonar sus ocupaciones y solicitar permiso para trasladarse a Alicante a reponerse. Pasa prácticamente todo el año en Alicante haciendo esporádicos viajes a Madrid.
In 18th century Spain, epilepsy was known as alferecia. In the last years of his life, Jorge Juan had lost the use of both hands due to this disease. He was staying at his home in Madrid when he suffered a new attack, which became complicated and then fatal. It was June 1773. Today, the remains of Jorge Juan rest in San Fernando in Cádiz, in the Panteón de Marinos Ilustres. Together with his friends, Antonio de Ulloa and the Marquis de la Ensenada. On the 21st of last month, at the age of 60, His Excellency, Don Jorge Juan y Santacilia, passed away. Commander of Aliaga of the Faith of San Juan, Squadron Leader of the Royal Navy, Captain of the Company of Knights Midshipmen. His unique talent, his application to the sciences, and the profound knowledge acquired in them gave him a worthy and creditable place amongst the scholars of Europe. He was advisor to the Royal Academy of San Fernando of this court, member and corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences in Paris, and academician of the Royal Society of London and of the Berlin Academy. Finally, the famous advances achieved under his leadership in naval shipyards, docks, and other maritime works prove him to have been a very useful person to king and country, one who brings honor to our century.